Dave Alex Riddett is a prominent cinematographer mostly known for his work at Aardman Animations, where he notably worked as cinematographer with Nick Park on his acclaimed Creature Comforts short and legendary Wallace and Gromit series. During his early years at Aardman, Dave also supplied his camera skills for Peter Gabriel's Sledgehammer music video. He was also senior director of photography on Aardman's first feature film, Chicken Run, and director of photography for Wallace and Gromit's first feature film, The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. And he's on the line with us here. Good afternoon, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Toby. How the devil are you?
I'm very well, thank you. So, how did you first get involved with Aardman in the first place?
Now, that goes back a long way, quite a way now. Because I studied through art college. I went to Leeds, eventually came to Bristol in 1977, which is where I first met Pete and Dave, the creators of Aardman Animations. I'd known of them through mutual friends. I used to pop around to see them, see what they're up to. In those days, they were doing Morph. It was just the two of them and doing the Morph TV series.
Yeah.
With Tony Hart. So I'd known them since the late 70s. I did a film course in Bristol, which I finished in 1978. And after that, I was freelancing. And one of the things I was freelancing on was doing some paint and trace for a feature film about the Sex Pistols.
Wow.
Part of it was being directed by a guy in Bristol, another associate of Pete and Dave. He was doing it was drawn animation, this sequence. Offered me a bit of work on that. And he said, we've got a bit of space. And Pete and Dave have got a little studio, but two rooms, one where they shot Morph and the other one where they did all their creative writing, etc.
Yeah.
So I'll give you a bit of space in there. So alongside them working out on Morph and that, I was painting green vomit, I think, for a scene from the Sex Pistols movie where they throw up in an airport. Wow. So as I was busy filling in green paint on cells, I was chatting to the guys there. So I got to see what they were doing. And I'd always been into animation since I was a kid. I mean, I was doing it at school and I did a lot at art college. So I had great empathy for what they were doing, and it was quite early days for them.
Yeah.
But after that, I because I was freelancing generally in live action stuff, and then I went on to teach and look after the students at the RFT course in Bristol, where I'd studied. In the meantime, I was trying to set up my own little studio, mainly doing animation because it was the cheapest way of making movies. And a colleague of mine, Dave Borthwick, from the RFT course, the Bristol film course, we sort of set up on our own, eventually nicknaming ourselves the bolexbrothers. Because basically we were shooting everything on a Bolex camera.
Yeah.
At that time, it was a magic camera. You could afford to buy them. It was only 16mm. It would do stop frame. It would do back wind. It would do all sorts of tricks. And it was quite a good way to experiment with movie making. And meanwhile, I'd kept in touch with Pete and Dave from Aardman's. And eventually, when I left working at the film unit, so I was branching out on my own, it's about the same time that Pete and Dave at Aardman's were starting to do commercial work. And they'd actually started taking on a staff. They had a junior, Richard Golozowski, or Golly, and a producer. And that was it, really. And I started working alongside them, partly because I had a fair degree of knowledge of the film industry and how to use all the equipment, but also because I had a love of animation. So I fitted in quite nicely there. Yeah. So that was in the mid-'80s, working alongside Pete and Dave. And just before Nick Park joined them.
Wow. So
we were contemporaries, really.
Yeah. And do you remember what the first projects that you worked on were? The
first projects were TV commercials. This is the first time that Pete and Dave, as Aardman Animations, I'd found a little niche of actually earning money, because I don't think doing more for any of those other projects was a way of making a living, really. Yeah. They're quite low budget projects. Yeah. But a lot of commercial people saw what they were doing. They'd done a few little vox pop things where you'd been taking people's conversations and animating to them. And this was a precursor of Nick Park's Creature Comforts. Yeah. And a lot of people in the advertising industries had seen some of these animations, which is quite unique at the time. Stop frame animation wasn't that well known, apart from children's television. Hogel's a lot of the BBC children's TV programs were stop frame animation, but they were done quite simply. What Pete and Dave were interested in doing, and myself as well, is actually doing something a bit more adult-orientated, in as much as it's not just for children. For I said this caught the eye of the commercials agencies, and they had quite big budgets to play with. So for the first time, Aardmans were able to make money and then plough that money back into making more and more elaborate short films.
And one of those early projects was the music video for Peter Gabriel's Sledgehammer. How did that process work? Because there's a lot going on there, and from reading up about it, it sounds like it took quite a while.
Well, surprisingly, it took very little time to actually shoot the project. It took a while to do the conception of it. Again, a guy called Steve Johnson had been asked to do a program for Peter Gabriel. He'd done a little bit on a film called Road to Nowhere for Talking Heads, which had a fair bit of stop frame animation in it. But he was asked to do something in this country. Aardman's just getting known. So basically, he chose them as being the production company to do it. Now, it was quite crude to start, really. I mean, when I came into work on it, I mean, basically the script was like some drawings on the back of an envelope, sort of thing. Quite crazy notions that Steve Johnson, the director, had. Some of which were impossible to film, but that's basically it was sort of improvised. And in fact, shooting it took 6 days, which is quite long for a music video. I mean, I think back then, I think a 3-day turnover was the norm, but 6 days in terms of animation is an incredibly short time.
Yeah,
I mean, we worked really, really hard to get that done. A lot of it was Pete tied to a chair. We had to position him in an old cinema chair I had with a neck brace on him, so we could do unspeakable things to him, like build train sets around his head and paint his face and do all sorts of things. So the bulk of the shooting was in Aardman's small studio in Clifton in Bristol, which is all the chair stuff there, animated lip sync. So he had to do all that stuff one frame at a time. And so it's quite time consuming, but so about four days of that. We then took on the space at the local drama theatre, the local drama department of the University's theatre, to do the bigger scenes and the big dance scenes, where we utilised a lot of the sort of the stage things, like having fly backgrounds that would drop down and raise up again, so we could actually animate the background, basically animating a whole, life-size set around him. But yes, that was after the last day on that was a Saturday, maybe going into the Sunday morning. So quite intense days, but in fact 6 days to actually shoot it was quite magical, and it was pretty well improvised as well. I mean, even during shooting the shots, because we're having to do them in sort of real time. It's a technique called pixelation, where you're animating a human being. But getting a human being to hold a pose for any length of time is difficult enough. So you more or less shoot a frame, then you say, right, move to the next vision, shoot a frame, right, move to the next vision, shoot the next frame. So it was done as a continuous piece of action, a lot of it. But yeah, quite strenuous work.
Yeah. Do you have to be quite patient when you're working in animation? Because that took 6 daes and that was relatively quick.
I mean, this is the cliche, you have to have a lot of patience. It depends what area you're working in there. I think for an animator, I mean, you just lose sense of time, really. You just lock yourself into that time scale and just get on with it. For people like myself who are actually servicing all that, like lighting it, whatever, what we do is we actually go in at the set, perhaps block it out, light it, check that it's all working. If there's any movements, we tend to be done with computers nowadays. We have to set it all up there. But then once all that is prepped and set up, we leave the animator to it. We lock the door, and we lock him in a room and walk away and go on to the next set. So the patience doesn't really apply to us so much, because we're kept really busy. I mean, the technical team involved in stop frame animation. And because it takes so long, we tend to have to work on lots and lots of different sets at the same time.
Yeah.
So on an average feature film, I probably will have about 35 sets on the go at any one time. And with that, I need quite a large team to cover that as well. So as soon as I've set one scene up there and the animator's going, I move on to the next one, or one of my crew does. So the technical side of it is, we're constantly busy. We're constantly moving around. The animators are just locked into that one shot for however long it takes to do.
That's interesting, because I suppose in live action there's only one Tom Cruise, so you can only do one thing at the same time. But I guess, do you have lots of different models of Wallace and Gromit, etc., so you can have those 35 sets?
You've got it in one, exactly. We do. I mean, I think on the last project, or the last Wallace and Gromit, I'm about to start another one, but the last one, we must have had at least 16 Wallaces.
Wow.
probably more grommets as well. Even with Gromit, we have like a standing Grommet or a walking Grommet.
Yeah.
They tend to have a different set of armatures for them there. So yes, they're also, it's sad to say it. There is no one Wallace and Gromit in here at the studio. There's whole teams of them as well. Yeah.
The original Wallace and Gromit from all those years ago, is that in a landfill site somewhere?
Sadly, plasticine, because that's how they were originally, and the original Wallace and Gromit were mostly plasticine. Doesn't really last more than a shot. If you could imagine, you've sculpted the character. I mean, take Moore, for example, who's totally plasticine, as is Gromit, but Gromit has a metal armature inside, and Wallace does. But the exterior of them, the plasticine, once the animator has gone through a shot, and I say these shots could take a day, a week, sometimes 3 weeks to do one shot. That plasticine is constantly being molded and moved and shifted around. At the end of the shot, you really, they're not in a good state. So they either have to go and be rebuilt or cleaned up. Or sometimes completely replaced.
Yeah.
So, in effect, the original plasticine characters don't really exist still. I have, in my case, I think I've got a plasticine Gromit who I do get out to take for talks and things there, but he can't really bend him around. He's dried out, really. The plasticine is really dried out there. I've got an old Shaun the Sheep as well, and the later puppets are a mixture of plasticine and latex and silicone, as well as having the metal armatures inside them. Even that doesn't really last. The later, anything latex has got a shelf life of about a year, really, if you keep it hermetically sealed. So actually, keeping original puppets is not impossible, really.
Yeah. And you say puppets, is that an animation term for just the models?
Yes, yeah, we tend to call them puppets, yeah.
And you've got a sitting and standing Gromit, etc.
Yeah.
Do you have different ones for different facial expressions, or is that done more kind of in the moment, adjusting it?
That's done in the moment. I mean, this is why we've kept the plasticine and the puppets nowadays. Really, it's just the bits that give human expressions, which is basically the face and the hands, tend to be plasticine still. And it's down to the dexterity and the talent of the animators to bring them to life. One labour-saving thing we do have, though, is for mouth shapes. We actually have those pre-prepared.
Yeah.
So assistant animator, a whole team of people, will have prepared a whole set of mouth shapes, say for Wallace, it's got his teeth in there and his little mouth shapes. So all the vowels and consonants, major vowels, there's about 12, 16 major shapes. These are all pre-formed. The animator then really, every time they want to change the mouth shape, they can pull one out of a box, prise the older one off and stick the new one in and then blend it in. And this is the beauty of the plasticine, is that even though you've got something pre-shaped, you still can play around with it. You can still get all those subtleties, which Aardmans are quite famous for, really, that sort of character animation. So that's the labour-saving thing there. But the faces are completely pliable. In wrong trousers, for example, though, I mean, going back to one of the early Wallace and Gromits, I think Nick on set himself manipulated every movement. So the mouth shapes are all done actually on the set by Nick, by hand. But nowadays we do try and save time by having the mouth shapes pre-prepared. But still plasticine.
Do you have to be quite prepared when you're going into a shoot as well? You have to know exactly what you want, because maybe if you were doing the photography in a live action movie, halfway through the shot you can go, this doesn't look as good as I thought it would, let's change it. Whereas if you did that in animation, that's a whole possibly week or two's work that you've just thrown out the window.
Yeah, no, everything is really scrupulously scripted and drawn out and rehearsed as well. So we'll have a storyboard. It'll start off with simple drawings that originally Nick would have done, but now his team, the whole storyboard team, will prep the drawings, and they'll be slightly animated as well to give a sense of timing. And so the whole show can be run as a series of slightly animated drawings just to see that it's working. So you sort of know where you are, and the animator has that as a guide. The animator then will actually, for each shot, will team up with the director, and they'll usually go into what we call the LAV, which is a live action video. And then they will actually act out the scene. And you have to remember that all the dialogue, etc., is pre-recorded.
Yeah.
You have to do that, or that's done in advance. So that's already been edited like a radio play, so that the director has decided on which take, which voice band. And that's a guide to the animator as well. So then the two of them, the director and the animator, will act out the scene. You get some quite humorous outtakes of them, which you may see on some of our videos. We tend to put some of those outtakes in of the live action videos. But they'll act the whole scene out, miming to the dialogue. The director will choose which one he thinks works best. And that will be put on the animator's tower as a video for them to look at and as reference. So that's how the animator, even though he's locked in his room for his 3 weeks or whatever, has actually got a guide that's been okayed with the director as to as the timing of the shot. But even within that, I mean, the animator has room to improvise, and that's part of the beauty of it. It's not, basically you've got the basics all down there, the timing's all there, but a lot of little subtleties can be added by the animator as well, which I think is very important, keeping some spontaneity to everything.
And how does the process differ when you're doing a feature film compared to working on the shorts that were originally made?
It's the timing, the precision of it, really. I mean, as a director of photography, I mean, it's my job to try and contain it as a whole. Is that although something is taking place, I mean, we're actually shooting a feature film over a period, normally about 14 months, a year and a half. Yeah. To try and maintain that visual look, I have to contain that all the while, or whoever is director of photography, you have to keep all that in your mind, even though everything's taking such a long, long time. So short films are a lot easier in that respect, but feature films also there's a high standard of yes, I say production values which you have to maintain for that period of time. So it is quite different. I mean, when we did Chicken Run, it was the first one. That was our first experience of doing a whole feature film, and that was a steep learning curve, really. Yeah, sure. It tends to be a lot more planning. You have to plan ahead of what colours you're going to be using over that period of time. How do you actually keep the audience interested for that amount of time? There's all these things there. You have to prep it so well, really. I mean, in some films, we'd probably spend a year in preparation, at least, in terms of design and story development and what sort of effects work you're going to have. And
when you were working on all these projects, I mean, particularly the ones right at the start, did you have any idea how big they would become?
No, no, not at all. I mean, it was always ambition to make good films, first of all. I've got an idea of making a feature on that. That would be great. But we never really thought in the early days that's what we would be doing over the next few years. But it gradually progressed. Each film we got more successful. We got more people start to take notice. But no, I mean, with the first Wallace and Gromit, although we all loved what we were doing, and we all thought it was absolutely wonderful. Yeah, it's brilliant project working on. Had no idea what success it would bring, really, what recognition, and the fact that we'd still be actually showing the same film now. That those films would be coming out every Christmas, and people would still get that enjoyment from them. And I think that's become something I'm so proud of. The films I've worked on is that they do have a good shelf life. They're not just one-off films. They have stood the test of time.
They've certainly lasted longer than Plasticine, that's for sure.
Yes, and some of the some people in government as well, I think.
Well, that's true. Why do you think they've stood the test of time? What actually is it about them?
It works on many levels, really. I think people they sort of recognise themselves in the characters, particularly with Nick's characters. They're all about the mundane, taken to real extremes. So people can recognise all the little knickknacks in the house and the domestic sort of scenarios. But throw into that Nick's love of genres like horror films or romantic comedies, and that they're all in there. There is something for everybody. And there's always things to discover as well. I know a lot of people say, well, I watched that film several times. I didn't notice in the background there's some little gags that are going on in there. And I think that's feedback from the way we make the films, that everything has to be made from hand. Everything's made from scratch. So we're very careful what we put in the films. Everything there is for a reason, even if it's just for a good gag. And they're like little Easter eggs that people keep picking up on. But they're endearing characters, I think. Particularly with Wallace and Gromit.
I suppose that's true. If you're spending absolutely ages doing all the shots and things, you're going to have a lot of time to add things into the background that you don't get otherwise.
Yeah, and the other thing about it as well, and I think it's very important to myself and a lot of the crew, is that you actually sense the craft of making that or telling that story. You actually do know that it is a model world, but it does exist. It's a physical world. You could put your hand in there, reach in there, and touch the buildings. And I think that's sort of, I think which something you tend to lose maybe with CG animation, etc. Is that sense of a crafted world that you're invited into.
Yeah.
And you can actually appreciate that people have actually sculpted all these, or and they've acted through their puppets or whatever.
It doesn't look miniature as well when you're watching it, does it?
I hope not. And that's again, that's something on the camera side you have to be careful of, is always placing the camera within the scene. You're not observing, you're not looking down on a model village. You're actually a participant in that world. And that's something we very carefully consider, as you would in live action. But because you're working with a completely controllable world there, you can do anything you like. We have to maintain that sort of reality that it's a little world that you're invited into and you're part of it.
And how's the process changed over the years? Because you've got fancier cameras now and widescreen and all of that. Do you have to do things a little bit differently?
There's a lot of things that have changed to make it easier for us. I mean, from the days of the early films, we were shooting on 35mm film, which meant we had enormous cameras. I mean, compared to the size of the puppets, it's like trying to film a human being with a lorry. I mean, the cameras are much larger than the puppets. So that used to be a problem, getting them into the scene, etc. Actually, how you place a camera in there. Nowadays, we're working with domestic DCLS, off-the-shelf stills cameras. So they're a lot smaller, a lot easier to get into the scene, a lot easier to move around. We use a lot of computer stuff for motion control for camera movements. Everything has to be repeated these days exactly. So we're very much reliant on the modern technology, which in the early days, I mean, sometimes we just had the camera on a piece of wood and we just move it around frame by frame. All sorts of things we did that you couldn't quite get away with now, because everything has to be so precise and repeatable. But and also things like rigging. I mean, on the early films, there was no rigging to hold the puppets up. What you saw on, say, Wrong Trousers, everything you saw there was what was in front of the camera. These days, to make things quicker and more versatile, the puppets are held up with rigs, which are digitally removed later. So it's easy to fly characters around and do much more subtle movements. And all the camera moves are controlled by a computer, as I said, so we can repeat them for effects work, to add smoke and all sorts of things. But there's a greater purity in the early films, which I think still hold up extremely well. But nowadays, there's a lot more technology. But of course, with technology, which is supposed to save time, it actually makes the process a bit more complicated and a bit more long-winded. It does mean you can do more things with the characters, certainly in terms of special effects. But personally, I'm a purist. I'd love to keep things as simple as you can, and keep. I'd like to do everything in camera, as we say. Like, what you see is what's happening in front of the camera.
That's the thing. How far do you go with the special effects? Because I'm guessing you wouldn't want to go the whole way and have it all CGI, because that destroys the whole point.
Absolutely.
So how much do you use?
Honestly, like Wallace and Gromit, I say try more so than other films, is keep it as simple and keep it down to the puppets doing their thing. And in fact, all the effects work in Wallace and Gromit's world are usually special effects that are performed by the animator, like pouring of water or like pouring tea is actually just like cellophane, dyed cellophane, actually animated coming out of the teapot into the cup. And the cup is, the liquid in the cup is plasticine. Whereas a lot of films these days, I mean, even stop frame films, they will use a lot of CGI, computer generated effects. But I do believe that something like Wallace and Gromit, that level of sophistication doesn't really fit into their world, into the look of it. Whereas like handmade water effects or fire or smoke effects, when you can do them, are actually much more in harmony with the look of a Wallace and Gromit film. But quite a lot of our other films in there, we are using CGI characters to fill in the background or for set extensions. Again, you have to think about the aesthetic of the particular film, of what it is. If they're all new characters, you can take them in a different direction. But I think Wallace and Gromit is a special world, certainly for me, and the regular crew. We try to keep it as true to its original form. Now,
what's coming up for you? Of course, you're probably not allowed to talk about this very much, but there are a couple of movies on the way.
Absolutely. Well, I've just been working on, not as director of photography, I've been working as what we call a senior lighting cameraman. So I've been in charge of certain scenes, and that's the Chicken Run 2. Which has been great fun. It's still shooting now, and it'll be shooting until next year. And I think that's due out Christmas time next year. So finally,
Yes.
after over 20 years, we've got the sequel to Chicken Run. So it's Chicken Run 2, Dawn of the Nugget, I think it's going to be called, which is incredible to look at. It's still got the old characters. It's got some great gags in it. It's a beautiful script. There's a new director, Sam Fell, has been directing it. And I say that's due to stop filming early next year. However, in the meantime, because I jumped ship on Chicken Run, I'm now working on the new Wallace and Gromit feature film.
Hey.
I'm in the preparation stage at the minute. I think we'll start filming in dead earnest in January. And that's due out, I think Christmas 24. It's quite a way away.
Yeah.
But in terms of what we have to do, it's not that long. So that I'm very much looking forward to getting into the major filming there. But at the moment, it's in development stage there. So we're testing out sort of new characters, new mouth shapes, new color schemes, or whatever. It's a wonderful script, absolutely wonderful script. I can't tell anything else apart from that. People who love Wallace and Gromit will not be disappointed.
Yay, that's good to hear. In the meantime, where can we keep up to date with you? Is there anywhere online?
I have a website, which is called davealexriddett.com.
Wow, what a surprise!
Very unimaginative something. I've got clips from some of the major films I've done, as well as some of my very early stuff. Because I do a lot of talks and a bit of teaching. I've got bits and pieces. You may think, well, why have you got that old rubbish on there? But it's all of interest, I think, to people who are starting out. Old films, new films. There's a mixture on there. So please have a look. And I've put a few behind-the-scenes films on there as well. So, for example, there's some from the Wallace and Gromit film, Matter of Loaf and Death.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of time when we're filming, but I do try and grab a camera every now and then and just get some shots of people at work, just to demystify the process a little bit, just to show people what actually happens behind the scenes. And there's a bit from one of the Shaun the Sheep movies as well.
I think I've seen like some old DVD extras along the way. They have things like that, aren't there? Yeah.
I tend the stuff that's on my website tends to be more sort of personally shot stuff. So some of it's a bit rough and ready, but there's a few comments from me as what was going on in some of the sequences.
Well, many thanks for joining us today. It's been very interesting to talk to you.
It's been a pleasure. Yeah, I hope I haven't waffled on too much.